کنفرانس در پارلمان انگلستان با حضور نمایندگان برجسته هر دو مجلس. محکومیت جنایت اسید پاشی به زنان و موج اعدام‌های وحشیانه توسط حکومت آخوندی. فراخوان به اقدام فوری برای تأمین امنیت اشرفی‌ها و اعلام لیبرتی به عنوان کمپ پناهندگی تحت نظارت ملل متحد. در یک کنفرانس پارلمانی در مجلس انگلستان که با حضور نمایندگان برجسته مجلسین این کشور برگزار شد، سخنرانان نقض فزاینده حقوق بشر توسط رژیم آخوندی، به ویژه جنایت اسید پاشی و موج اعدام‌ها در ایران را محکوم و تأکید کردند که مذاکرات اتمی با رژیم ایران نباید باعث تحت الشعاع قرار گرفتن پرونده جنایات این رژیم بشود. در این کنفرانس لورد کارلایل، عضو مجلس اعیان و حقوقدان برجسته انگلستان با رتبه مشاورت ملکه، لورد تونی کلارک، عضو مجلس اعیان و رئیس پیشین حزب کارگر، لورد دالاکیا، معاون رهبری حزب لیبرال دموکرات انگلستان در مجلس اعیان، لورد برایان کاتر، عضو مجلس اعیان، دیوید جونز، وزیر ولز در کابینه دیوید کامرون 2012-2014 و نماینده برجسته پارلمان انگلستان دیوید ایمس، نماینده ارشد پارلمان انگلستان و رئیس مشترک کمیته پارلمانی بریتانیایی ایران آزاد، برایان بینلی، نماینده پارلمان انگلستان، مارک ویلیامز، نماینده پارلمان انگلستان، مایک هنکاک، نماینده پارلمان انگلستان و معاون کمیته امور سیاسی و دموکراسی مجمع پارلمانی شورای اروپا، مالکوم فاولر، عضو کمیته حقوق بشر کانون وکلای انگلستان و ولز و استرون استیونسون، رئیس بنیاد اروپایی آزادی عراق شرکت داشته و سخنانی ایراد کردند.
Recently there has been a spate of religiously approved, horrific and vicious state-sponsored acid attacks against women in Iran. At least 25 women in Isfahan, Tehran and Kermanshah have been the victims of these monstrous acts.
لورد کارلایل، حقوقدان برجسته انگلستان با رتبه مشاورت ملکه که ریاست این جلسه را بر عهده داشت، در سخنان خود درباره موج اسید پاشی به روی زنان ایران گفت: شکی نیست که این حملات توسط گروه‌های جنایتکار مورد حمایت رژیم انجام می شود. این آخرین ظهور خشونت را باید به اعدام‌های بیشماری افزود که به رغم وعده‌های روحانی به وقوع می‌پیوندد. عقیده من و همکارانم در پارلمان نمی‌توان موضوع حقوق بشر را از مذاکرات اتمی و یا فعالیت‌های تجاری تفکیک کرد. وی در سخنان خود همچنین موضوع فعالیت‌های مخفی اتمی رژیم را مد نظر قرار داد و ضمن یادآوری پنهانکاری‌های رژیم در این زمینه به افشاگری‌های مقاومت ایران پرداخت و تأکید کرد شورای ملی مقاومت توانست نشان بدهد که رژیم ایران با کشورهای غربی صادقانه رفتار نکرده است، به ویژه با کشورهایی که با آنها بر سر موضوع اتمی مذاکره می‌کند. این رژیم در ارتباط با مکانهایی که فعالیت هسته‌ای صورت گرفته است حقیقت را نگفته است. این موضوعی است که میبایست نگرانی عمیق دولت آمریکا، دولت انگلستان و اتحادیه اروپا را برانگیزد.
One cannot, in my view, and in the views of our parliamentary committee, decouple human rights from the nuclear negotiations or business activities. We should not abandon that sort of principle, which is the kind of principle which has been traditional, at least until recently, in the UK's Foreign and Commonwealth Office and in the United States State Department.
پیام رئیس جمهور برگزیده مقاومت به کنفرانس پارلمانی در مجلس انگلستان.
distinguished members of the House of Commons and House of Lords, I thank you for holding this conference in the current difficult situation. The nuclear talks between the Iranian regime and the 5+1 is in its last round. At the same time, an international coalition is forming to combat terrorism and extremism, which has endangered the international community. Western governments' approach towards both challenges is crucial. Will they adopt a firm policy to prevent the Iranian regime from obtaining nuclear weapons? Would airstrikes against ISIS be enough to destroy the roots of extremism and terrorism in the region? I would like to therefore reflect on a few points. First, the Iranian regime in two ways has contributed to emergence of the terrorist group ISIS and the threat it poses to the world. This regime is the epicenter of terrorism and fundamentalism in the region. All such atrocities that the world is rightly concerned with today has been committed in Iran during the past 35 years. Over the past few weeks, scores of women were victims of acid attacks in Iran by government-backed thugs under the pretext of improper veiling. There is no such thing as compulsory veiling in Islam, and such barbarism must strongly be condemned. This regime does not respect international frontiers and has been seeking an Islamic caliphate. On the other hand, the regime relentless support for dictatorship like Bashar Assad in Syria and Malik in Iraq, and aid to expand sectarian violence and suppression of the Sunni community has widely attributed to the growing of ISIS. The second point is that the greater threat remains the Iranian regime's meddling in other countries and its nuclear weapon program. Today, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen are de facto occupied by the mullah's regime through its proxies and paramilitary groups. The regime's advances in the region is the result of the policy of appeasement and not its strength. In short, the Iranian regime is the core of the problem and not part of the solution. It is therefore crucial to evict the Iranian regime from Iraq, Syria, and the region in order to succeed. It is also crucial to engage with the Iraqi tribes and Sunni population to empower them and let them play their role in the government. Any cooperation with the mullah's regime in the fight against extremism is like asking the Nazis to help liberate France during World War II. My third point is the need for the correct policy to confront this crisis. The core of such policy to achieve the best result is to reject any appeasement of the godfather of fundamentalism and terrorism. As you all know, as part of the policy of appeasement, PMOI was proscribed. Then, in 2003, it was bombed by US and British planes, and afterwards, Iraq was offered to the mullah's regime on a silver platter. This misguided policy has been very damaging. PMOI is the flag bearer of real Islam. It represents a democratic and tolerant Islam and is antithesis to Islamic fundamentalism. This movement is inspirational to all those who reject violence and atrocity under the name of Islam. Ashraf and Liberty are the source of this inspiration. Dear friends, concerning nuclear talks, the right approach is the implementation of UN Security Council resolutions which call for a complete halt to enrichment, unconditional inspection of all sites, and signing the additional protocols. The US, Senate, and Congress also insist on these conditions. As the leader of resistance, Masoud Rajavi, said, no patriot, nationalist, freedom-loving, and progressive Iranian would tolerate atomic bomb in the hands of religious dictatorship in Iran. A correct policy is also needed regarding the residents of Camp Liberty. Protection of the residents is the obligation of Western governments and, in particular, the United States. I would like to also urge all of you to continue with your efforts to end the current inhuman restrictions on the residents' access to medical care and for Liberty to be declared a refugee camp with freedom of movement for the residents and protected by relevant international bodies. You have fought courageously for years against appeasement and the unjust listing of the PMOI and have triumphed. The honor to defend a correct and just policy and supporting a just and legitimate resistance for democracy and freedom is yours. Thank you.
I want to concentrate in a few minutes I've got on Iraq rather than Iran, although I will say something about Iran as well. It was interesting watching Madame Rajavi's presentation on film. I recall 10 years ago when I was Vice President of the European People's Party, the biggest group in the European Parliament. I invited Mrs. Rajavi to come and address our group meeting in Brussels in the European Parliament. And we had a crisis. We had phone calls from Angela Merkel, from Chancellor Schussel, who was Chancellor of Austria at the time, from the Prime Minister of Spain, from President Chirac, saying you must not allow this woman to come and speak to your parliament. Otherwise, the Iranians will walk out of the nuclear negotiations. 10 years ago. Where have we got with the nuclear negotiations? Nothing has happened. They have played for time and they are on the verge now of producing a nuclear weapon. And this is what happens when you play the game of appeasement with these people. I warned when I became president of the delegation for relations with Iraq 5 years ago. I warned that Nouri al-Maliki, the Prime Minister of Iraq, was a major problem. He was a puppet of the Iranian regime. He was allowing the Iranians to pull his strings. He started to wage a genocidal campaign against the Sunni population of Anbar province, and that in turn sucked in and it gave the possibility for ISIS to come in from Syria and to exploit the situation happening in Anbar so that they could take up weapons and take over control, and now they control much of Anbar province. We have seen since then Iraq almost splitting apart. Nouri al-Maliki marginalized the Kurds, waged war against his own people from the Sunni faith, allowed the open suppression and discrimination of all the other minorities, including the Christian community. It is one of the oldest Christian communities in the world. This is what happened under the dictatorship of Nouri al-Maliki, the man who, on instructions from the mullahs in Tehran, started the systematic annihilation of the residents of Camp Ashraf. Let me just remind you that in July 2009, on the 28th and 29th of July, the first attack on Camp Ashraf left 11 dead and hundreds injured. On the 8th of April 2011, 36 killed and hundreds injured. On the 9th of February 2013 in Camp Liberty, with a rocket attack, 8 killed and dozens injured. On the 15th of June 2013, 2 killed and dozens injured. Then, horrifically, on the 1st of September 2013, the remaining 100 people who had been left behind in Camp Ashraf to guard the property and stop it being looted by Maliki's thugs were attacked, who executed 52 of the 100, took 7 hostage, including 6 women, and left dozens injured. They would have killed all 100. In fact, there were 101 had they found them all. And then on the 26th of December last year, another rocket attack in Camp Liberty, 4 killed and dozens injured. After each of these attacks, we have hand-wringing by the authorities, by this government here in Britain, by the Americans, by Baroness Ashton, the High Representative for Foreign Affairs in the EU, by Ban Ki-moon in the UN, saying this is a tragedy, and we are calling on our friends in the Iraqi government and Nouri al-Maliki to investigate who was behind these killings. I mean, this is outrageous. And telling him, you know, we will wait to hear the result of your investigations. There has not been a single investigation because Nouri al-Maliki gave the orders for these massacres. He should be brought before the international courts and indicted for terrorism, for crimes against humanity, and for murder. And I believe that all of us in this room will live to see that happen.
I want to talk about briefly, and it will be briefly I'm afraid, I wanted to come and show again solidarity with you in our campaign. I wanted to talk again about human rights. That was the main motivation why I became engaged in our struggle. And yet we are where we are. We've heard about the conditions under which people endure in Camp Liberty. And I make this plea yet again, repeatedly to government, that they must address, however great the temptations, to talk to the Iranian regime. Do not lose sight ever of the human rights violations that are being perpetrated in Iran by the regime. We were told on the election, and I hesitate to call it an election because we know the limitations on elections in Iran, the way in which candidates are whittled down and weaned out of the process. But it failed in the democratising human test when it came to Mr. Rouhani. And we know that because of what we've seen in these horrific photographs, that so-called moderate leadership of Iran, 1,000 people have been executed, more than in the preceding years. The human rights situation in Iran is deteriorating fast, and that demands a Western response. We've heard about those brutal attacks more generally on numerous women, on Ifshahan, in Tehran and Kermanshah. It is implicit on all of us to remind them, and I repeat, whatever the temptations of UK government or American authorities or anybody else to discuss any matters of importance with the Iranian authorities, they don't lose sight of the most important issue of all, and that is the most basic human rights that everybody globally should expect. Thank you.